Okay, guys, and now we are going to our next panel. Is going to be panel with, we're going to talk about China's steps in tech on its way to becoming #1 world economy, One Belt, One Road initiative in tech. And our moderator going to be Musheer Ahmed. He is a founder and managing director of FinStep Asia, Fintech Association in Hong Kong, and panelists Julia Charlton, Musheer Ahmed, Imran Janata, Tony A.Verb, and Michael Sung. I'm sure that all of you already here. Just turn on your cameras and the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone. Sergey, my video needs to be restarted by you guys.
Wait a second. Here it is. Just turn it on.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us here today on the Digital Week Online. I have a stellar panel with me. And unfortunately, Imran cannot make it because of a family emergency. But we do have Tony, Julia, and Michael. Michael, are you able to switch your video on?
No, the host won't.
Guys, switch your video on for good looking. Yeah, perfect.
The host needs to let me do so. Please let me turn on my video.
Sergey, could you turn on Michael Sung's video, please?
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Perfect. Great. So I know we are starting a little late, but what I will do is we will start off with an introduction of each of the panelists and their connection with China to emphasize about the value they're bringing to the panel. And let's start with you, Julia. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your connection with China and One Belt, One Road.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Julia Charlton. I'm a corporate finance lawyer in Hong Kong. I've worked in Hong Kong and China doing corporate finance work for over 30 years. I set up this firm in 1996 and set up offices in Shanghai, Beijing, and Myanmar, where I work quite a lot. I've been a listing committee member of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. I'm a takeover panel member of the Hong Kong SFC and have other government appointments in Hong Kong. So we advise a lot on crypto, blockchain, fintech, data centers in China. I've been heavily involved in the IPO market in China, listing in Hong Kong mainly with a number of tech companies. And we also have done a lot of M&A work throughout the Belt and Road area, through Central Asia, Africa, South America, mainly Chinese companies over the years, making external acquisitions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julia. Tony, how about giving a quick introduction about yourself and your projects, please?
My name is Tony A.Verb, and it's good to be here. I've been in and out of Asia for 14 years and been based in Hong Kong for 9. I've been getting involved dealing with China for the past couple of years, quite frankly in the context of the Greater Bay Area, but in broader sense, connecting China with the rest of the world with a special attention to Europe. My chosen field is technology and innovation that can positively impact urbanization. We are focusing on later stage such companies from an investment and innovation facilitation perspective across the borders. And the Greater Bay Area is not limiting, but symbolizing what we stand for, because this is a region that is urbanizing extremely fast, the biggest megacity in the building, innovative by definition and cross-border by nature. So it's good to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tony. And over to Michael, who's right now in Shanghai, if I'm correct.
That's right. I'm living in China. Yeah, I'm
Yes.
the only one officially. Yeah, so I'm the co-director of the Fudan Fanhai Fintech Research Center. Do a lot of research on fintech policy, best practices and digital assetization, these kind of things. I am also faculty of the national think tank China Institute of Economics and Finance. So we kind of give policy recommendations on fintech innovation to the country. Then beyond that, I also kind of share Tony's sort of philosophy of cross-border interdisciplinary, connecting of innovation. So I run a platform called Carbon Blue Innovations, where I am trying to scale fintech innovation now in developing countries. I actually advise the UN ESCAP, the Economic and Social Commission of Asia Pacific, on digital finance, and we're trying to build out essentially digital infrastructure, digital economy infrastructure in developing countries.
Thanks, Michael. A quick background about me. I'm the founder of FinStep Asia, which is an advisory to help innovative companies in Asia move to the next stage. We also work with corporates on their innovation journey. I'm also co-founder of an initiative called India Tech Hong Kong, which is primarily based to bridge the startup ecosystem between India and China through Hong Kong as our base. And along with Michael, I'm also part of the UNESCAP ESBN network, where I'm part of the Youth and Women Entrepreneurship Network. Secondly, and lastly, I'm also a founding board member of the Fintech Association of Hong Kong. Delighted to have all three of you here. And I think it's a very interesting topic when we talk about the One Belt, One Road. A lot of it has been always looked at from a physical infrastructure basis for the last 20 years, with hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on it. But today's topic is focused around tech and where the next decade will take China with their partnership in the One Belt, One Road using technology. So it'll be very good to understand your views about how China will be able to transition from having powered infrastructure, finance infrastructure projects in the One Belt, One Road for the last 2 decades to now driving tech initiatives in the coming years. So Julia, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, it's really hard to know where to start, where China's tech initiatives will be in the Belt and Road area. But I think obviously the technology involved in rolling out high-speed rail and 5G is huge. In Myanmar, for example, I've already seen the involvement of Chinese companies building out tech infrastructure and broadband and Wi-Fi. And that's been part of the contribution which has taken Myanmar from a situation in around 2012 when there was less than 1% penetration to levels of over 30% Wi-Fi internet penetration levels similar to Indonesia and Philippines. And I think that they will also be involved in the in Myanmar in the early stages of banking, fintech, payment systems. We can see that already. But I really think apart from that, the most significant areas are going to be in artificial intelligence. And I think that will be rolled out in the areas of healthcare, education, driverless cars, transport, and so on. But obviously all of this will hinge on having the infrastructure, the tech infrastructure, which is both hardware and software, and the connectivity networks in place. So clearly China's already putting an enormous amount of investment into these areas. Just as a small example, I'm involved myself on an IPO of a company in China, which is building 5G towers and the software around those. And that's just in one province. And that's a hugely profitable business for one company of many in one province in China. So there's obviously an enormous amount of work to do to build out the infrastructure, which is going to support all of these technology, and in particular, I think artificial intelligence. So I think the level of the investment in Belt and Road is going to be enormous. And the other area I would think would possibly be digital RMB, on which a whole new financial system can be based. And I'm sure Professor Song is going to have views on this. I mean, we could have fintech, insurtech, regtech, all the related technologies. They could transform trading systems and form a commercial and payment gateways throughout the Belt and Road area, obviously creating enormous trading opportunities and wealth. And these could be relatively frictionless payment systems, which would have a massive effect on the welfare of millions of billions of people actually throughout the whole Belt and Road area. But it's sort of anyone's guess where it will go, which direction will take off the most, because the application of AI sometimes to real world situations lags way behind the possible capabilities of the technology. But I think if anyone can do it, it would be China. Yeah.
Thank you, Julia. Michael, Julia just touched upon the digital RMB as well, but in your view, if to start off with as a primer, what would you feel, how will they be able to transition from the physical part to the technology drive?
Yeah, so if you look at the initial, build out of the Belt and Road, it was mostly, very offline infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. We're talking high-speed rail and ports and this kind of thing, right? But where are they going to lay the high-speed rail? They're going to lay telecom infrastructure, and they're going to light up different parts of the Belt and Road. And in many of these areas, if you look at the where the Belt and Road is going, it's all these developing countries. It's the ones, anything pre-COVID that was growing over a few percent, right? Is the high growth countries in Eastern Asia, or Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, these places, right? So I think there's now that that's built, I think the next phase of development will be what we call the digital Silk Road, right? Laying down the digital economy infrastructure, which includes 5G, but also includes things like China's new blockchain services network, they're called the BSN. They're basically developed, you can think of it as the next protocol layer, internet, right? Like TCP was a sharing of information, right? This is a new protocol that can share value and data and eventually digital assets in a trusted way through the ethos of blockchain. And all that infrastructure now is being deployed massively on the mainland. There actually was a commercial launch of BSN April 25th, so a few weeks ago. There's over 100 city nodes in China, and it'll be scaling to 200 by the end of this year. And the next phase of development will be to take that BSN network and to connect all of the Belt and Road and all of its trade partners, such that Chinese companies and other international partners can conduct trade more effectively. And of course, I was meant as a RMB, and that will be part of the strategy to connect through trade and trade facilitation, eventually financial connection through this entire Belt and Road region. So I think it's very, very exciting because, again, where you're lighting up the Belt and Road with this infrastructure, you can provide financial inclusion tools. So this is something that Musheer, with the UN SCAP, we're looking at quite in detail, which is basically, if we are to develop the digital economies of these developing nations, then what is the core infrastructure? Part of it is like data centers and hardware, but a lot of it is interconnectivity with the BSN. And then what you want to do is stick all the fintech solutions on top, right? You want to be able to give digital wallets, everybody can have digital identities, they have exchanges to trade digital assets. All that infrastructure is being developed as we speak and has been massively accelerated by COVID-19, right? Because now all these countries, there might be regulations on digital assets, for example, or trade facilitation, where the legal ramifications of a document offline does not have the same standing online. All those barriers are being torn down because now all these countries are desperate to get their fragile economies back on gear. So there is an actual proactive adoption of these technologies. So I view that COVID-19, even though it's a human tragedy, is a major catalyst for the world to connect, coming at a time, notably, where there's been a deglobalization, right? We got the world powers trying to deconnect and decouple, and supply chains moving apart and things like that. So we would like to consider that there is a positive force of globalization through this new IT infrastructure that can connect the world and allow people to harmonize.
Unmuting myself, sorry. Thank you, Michael. That's quite interesting, right? In terms of how blockchain and the digital infrastructure is going to have a big say in how One Belt, One Road develops, right? Now, talking about, Julia touched upon it. You spoke about the high-speed rail. Michael's also spoken about, and you both spoke about 5G, and Michael's spoken about the digital infrastructure. Tony, you have been looking at smart cities as well as urban mobility and urban tech for the last 2 years, specifically, as you mentioned, around the Greater Bay and connecting that to the rest of the world, especially in particular Europe. So what are your insights in terms of the overall development of the smart city ecosystem, as well as urban tech when it comes to One Belt, One Road? Where do you see as the main areas for focus, and what do you think are the challenges?
Thanks for the question, Musheer. And then I just like to add one component to your previous question, and just being a bit more macro and broad. I think when we talk about anything these days, and if you consider what One Belt, One Road is it's inspired by trade, but it's also geopolitics, and it's also a market. And everything is technology these days. So I'm not even differentiating between technology and non-technology anymore. If we talk about market development and if we talk about infrastructure, that will be tech-enabled anyway. And obviously that relates to mobility, that relates to cities, urbanization. I think there are a lot of very interesting components to say here. How much time do I have to answer this question, by the way? I will try to focus an hour.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Use the amount of time that you have and you feel could be useful for the audience. Yeah, go ahead.
Guys,
right.
we have 10 minutes still left. 10 minutes, please.
10 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, 10 minutes left. I'm sorry, but that's the timing.
I will go away from here. I'll get back. Okay, 2 minutes. So I think then I will just say that the most interesting and the most relevant, I guess, the most recent highlight, which is kind of a new term, but not a new thing. It's called new infrastructure. And then under new infrastructure, there are 7 areas that the Chinese government deems important. And these are 5G, industrial internet, intercity transportation and inner city rail systems, data centers, artificial intelligence, ultra high voltage, and new energy vehicle charging stations. Obviously, if we look at this new infrastructure, it's all about smart cities, it's all about mobility, it's all about transportation. And if we just connect it back to trade is all about moving goods and people, and for that there needs to be an infrastructure. And as I said previously, all this needs to be tech enabled. And what enables all this as a core technology? Obviously, it is 5G. So I do think that through 5G, the data flow between the Belt and Road markets and across the Belt and the Road will be secured and enabled. And that is a huge push. And I think also in line with the previous answer or the previous question of yours, some of the biggest tech companies in the world are actually Chinese and in China, and they are expanding. And obviously for them, the natural markets to expand are across the Belt and Road countries and markets. And these are actually the countries as well that are probably urbanizing the fastest in the world. So where there's market, where there's growth and where there's focus, there are cities, there are smart cities, there's 5G, there's data, there's infrastructure that's tech enabled, obviously high speed railway and all sorts of things that we already touched upon, Julia touched upon. So challenges, I think the major challenge from this perspective that obviously not only China is eyeing these markets, these markets can be subject to geopolitical rivalry. I do think that is a challenge not only for China, but for all of us. It's also a risk for many of these markets and countries, many of the players that are trying to align themselves with various partners, whether it's governments or major technology companies. But the opportunity is enormous, and I would argue that there's an opportunity for everyone. And we see that in various Belt and Road markets, such as the Philippines, where there's major infrastructure push, and Japan is there and investing and developing infrastructure, tech-enabled infrastructure, and China is there and investing and developing tech-enabled infrastructure. I think Thailand and Malaysia are other areas and markets where we see rapid growth and expansion in terms of tech-enabled infrastructure and mobility projects. But as I said, I could talk for an hour, so probably we should book another session next time and dedicate it for all that. But let's just continue the flow of the conversation. These are my new infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I think it's quite insightful from the mobility and how you connected both the tech and movement of people to where smart cities are going. Another element that I would like to add is with regards to digital banking, right? So as some of you would be aware, Hong Kong has launched virtual banking initiative early last year, and now we've seen the virtual banks go online. Quite a few of them are made up of consortiums which consists of large tech giants like Alibaba, Tencent, JD.com, with large banks, Chinese banks like Bank of China, ICBC. So the Tencent one, for example, is has a collaboration with ICBC, so one of the world's largest tech companies, working with one of the world's largest banks. And the reason there is not just to serve a highly served market, which is Hong Kong, but also to look at One Belt, One Road. That would be my understanding and my impression of that. Once they are able to use Hong Kong as the example or test market, then they'll be able to go and bridge access globally. Now, moving on very quickly, Julia, what from a regulatory perspective do you think are going to be the important elements for tech? We've seen the pushback from 5G enablement in Europe and in US for Huawei and the Chinese giants. But with regards to OBOR, how do you see that playing across? Like, what would be the key regulatory challenges? And if you could keep it concise, we could get Tony and Michael to say a few words before we end.
Sure. Well, I won't get too much into the security and the geopolitical aspects, which Tony's already alluded to, which are clearly uppermost in relation to Huawei. I mean, China, while it was developing as a manufacturing base and so on, was clearly a standards taker, and it now aspires to be a standards setter. And it's come up with quite a few efforts in terms of standards setting. In 2019, it pushed policy objectives. It signed up standardization agreements with apparently around 85 countries. And this sort of push towards standard setting is very much part of this China Standards 2035 plan, which hasn't yet been fully published, which is apparently going to lay a blueprint for the Chinese government and for leading tech companies to set standards for emerging technologies. And that would be in concert with the Made in China 2025 policy. But, you know, and the other big area, I think, is data privacy. Chinese people have been relatively acquiescent to the amount of data collection which occurs in China. And although I think there are theoretically a lot of limits, in practice, they're not very enforced in China, which is, you know, the other end of the spectrum. We have the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, which is clearly very much at odds with all of that. And the US itself has got federal laws, but it also has got a number of states with very different laws, which makes standardization there quite difficult. And China has established a sort of standard for personal investor data protection in 2018, and they're supposed to be rolling more of that out. But having said all that, perhaps the acquiescence in China to the collection of data and so on actually hugely facilitates the development of artificial intelligence because of the data sets. I think apparently they could do an awful lot better in terms of the standardization of data sets, and that might be another standardization if you're going to roll out more of that through the Belt and Road diaspora. But clearly that sort of battle of standards is going to be key, and data privacy, which does seem perhaps not so much of a big issue in China, is a big issue in relation to the rest of the world. But just as an example, perhaps, that I thought of where that makes such a difference is, you know, Germany is seen to lead the world in certainly lead the Western world in terms of tracking over COVID. But a lot of that is quite manual. It's a lot of phone calling and so on. And that is actually way behind in terms of efficiency, what's going on in China, which is very integrated into smartphones and so on, because the population has been very willing to do that. So, you know, we've got quite a difference there between the sets of standards. And if the standards that prevail throughout the Belt and Road diaspora end up being the Chinese standards, that may produce a lot of much more efficient application of the technologies.
Yeah, thank you. Tony, what for you is going to be the most exciting thing that will come out in urban mobility in the next 3 years from China that can be leveraged onto OBOR, not just from China, but that can be leveraged into One Belt, One Road?
Sorry, in terms of urban mobility in particular?
Yes.
I'm not sure whether it's urban mobility in particular. I don't think I can give you any, you know, any updates. I think it has to be the high-speed railway, and it has to be like urban rail, i.e. metro lines. Basically, even if you consider in Manila, the first metro line of the country is actually being built right now, or just being awarded the job to a Chinese consortium. and it is about to be built. Originally only in Makati, but the mayor of Makati is trying very hard to align the other mayors within Metro Manila to join forces and actually develop something more meaningful. I think there are a lot of cities across Belt and Road that miss such basic infrastructure. And quite frankly, if we consider the strength of even Hong Kong, MTR being one of the best and most efficient metro operator, rail operator in the world. There's a lot of expertise, even from the Greater Bay Area to export along these lines. But obviously, the Chinese high-speed railway system is larger than the rest of the world's combined. So there's a lot of expertise to export to the other markets, and it's badly needed. Now, we consider this by now basic infrastructure in China. It's very, very progressive if we consider the markets we are talking about.
Thanks. I'm going to end with asking Michael, we're talking about, as Tony highlighted here, that there is that gap between the tech that China's producing versus the infrastructure capabilities, even in tech, for a lot of the OBOR countries, right? They're still emerging, they're still developing. How do you see BSN filling that gap up? And whether there is the technology infrastructure to enable BSN as well?
Guys, please, we are turning, we have to finish. Just a couple of words.
He'll be concise, I'm sure. Thanks, Sergey.
Do I have a word? Okay, so basically, the BSN actually is very lightweight in the sense that there is no hardware infrastructure. Right? You think of it as a protocol layer thing. But what that does is it connects the world such that the fintech stacks on top can be given out as these blockchain as a service. You can think of it as an app store for blockchain services, which will now be able to be democratized to most of the developing world. So I think, and one final word, which is basically the reason why it's important, okay, is because you need to increase GDP through different means. In China, 2/3 of GDP growth is consumption, right? So if you actually create infrastructure in a lightweight fashion that can boost consumption through digital economy, then I think a lot of these countries can grow much faster than they otherwise would. You get the tools of these digitizations. So I think this is the key to for the world to come together. This is the key for the world to actually pull themselves, the local economies, out of the difficult situation that they're in, and empower humanity through financial inclusion and latching onto the digital economy.
Guys,
Tony, had a final word?
No, please.
Final word.
Yes.
Final word. It'll wrap up well, Sergey. Just give me a final word. Yeah, go on, Tony.
Yes, Tony.
I just wanted to say that, answering your question, Musheer, it's very important to address climate change. I do think that through the infrastructure and the solutions that are rolled out across the Belt and Road, I would like to see carbonless technologies rolled out. So I thought it was very important to add, because there is an opportunity by building new assets to be climate change positive.
Got it. Thank you so much for all of our panelists. I think we've had a very interesting discussion on various points ranging from mobility to 5G to blockchain. And of course, climate is going to play a big part, and we will wait and watch if climate tech is going to be the most important part of OBOR. So thank you to Sergey, Ivan, and Digital Week Online for having us. And we look forward to the next sessions going forward. So thank you very much.